What if I told you that before humanity ever spoke the name of Jesus or whispered the word salvation, there was another who had already faced the false creator? And one? What if the very first human to awaken from the illusion of the material world was not a prophet, not a god, but a rebel, a son of light who dared to defy the Demiurge itself? Most people have never heard his name outside of a few lines in Genesis. Seth, the third son of Adam and Eve. To the church, he was only a replacement for Abel, but to the ancient Gnostics, Seth was far more than that. He was the first awakened one, the prototype of the enlightened human who recognized the deception of the world and refused to bow to its false ruler. His story, buried, erased, and labeled heresy, reveals the hidden origin of all spiritual rebellion. Why was his name so feared among the early fathers of the church? Why did entire sects, the Sethians, devote themselves to his secret teachings, claiming he held the divine spark that the Demiurge could never extinguish? And why did these writings vanish, condemned as dangerous illusions, only to be rediscovered centuries later in the sands of Nag Hammadi? This video will take you into the forgotten depths of that story. We'll uncover who Seth truly was, what the Demiurge represents, and how the battle between the false light and the divine truth began, not in heaven, but inside the human soul. But before we unveil what Seth really discovered, a revelation that could transform how you see the Creator, the soul, and the purpose of human suffering, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and follow these hidden revelations. Every week, we uncover spiritual truths that were silenced for centuries, and your support helps bring light back to them. Now let's enter the world before the flood, where the Demiurge ruled through illusion, and one being dared to see beyond the veil. To understand why Seth became such a central figure in Gnostic tradition, we must first return to the moment humanity fell under the veil of illusion. According to the Sethian texts discovered in Nag Hammadi, the world we know was never created by the true, ineffable God, but by a lesser being, a counterfeit deity, blinded by his own arrogance. This being, the Demiurge, believed himself to be the only God. He fashioned the material universe as a prison, beautiful in appearance, but corrupt in essence, designed to keep souls trapped in cycles of ignorance, desire, and death. When Adam and Eve were formed, they carried within them a fragment of the true divine light, the spark of the unknowable Father beyond the cosmos. But the Demiurge, jealous of that light, sought to bury it beneath layers of illusion. According to the Apocryphon of John, Eve's offspring were divided between those who belonged to the light and those who remained enslaved to matter. Cain and Abel were the products of confusion, bound to the forces of the archons. But when Seth was conceived, something changed. He was not born of ignorance, but of a moment of divine remembrance, a union between spirit and flesh that the Demiurge could not fully control. The Gnostics wrote that Sophia, the divine feminine wisdom who had been cast down into the material realm, secretly placed her spark within the lineage of Seth. In him, the divine plan began to repair what had been broken. Seth became the symbol of the true human, the one who recognizes the illusion of this world and remembers his celestial origin. This is why the early Sethians called him the father of the spiritual race. But what exactly did Seth see that others could not? The text described that after his birth, he laughed at the powers of the world. This laughter is not mockery, it is awakening. It means he perceived that the rulers who governed the material world were impostors. He saw through the deception that humans were meant to serve, obey, and fear the God of this realm. His laughter was a form of victory, the recognition that the Demiurge, though powerful, was ultimately blind. Imagine living in a world where everything you see, the sky, the earth, even your own body, is part of an intricate illusion designed to keep you asleep. To laugh at it, to awaken within it, requires something extraordinary. This is why the Gnostics revered Seth not as a god, but as a mirror of what every human could become. His defiance was not rebellion against the true divine, but against the counterfeit light that rules this dimension. And perhaps that is why his name had to be erased. Because if people began to understand that awakening is possible, that salvation does not come from obedience, but from remembering who you truly are, the entire system of control would crumble. But the story of Seth does not end with his awakening. Ancient texts claim that he passed on a secret lineage, not of blood, but of knowledge, to those capable of carrying the divine spark forward. These teachings would become the foundation of the hidden schools of wisdom that survived even after the flood. The question is, what did he teach that was so dangerous, so forbidden, that even centuries later, the church would call his followers children of the serpent? We'll uncover that next, a sacred knowledge of Seth, the code of awakening that threatened the throne of the Demiurge itself. If the world was ruled by a false creator, how could one ever escape its grasp? The Gnostics taught that the answer lay in Gnosis, direct knowledge of divine truth, not faith or obedience. Seth, they said, was the first to receive this Gnosis. He was shown the structure of the heavens, the names of the archons who governed each layer, and the path that led beyond them, back to the pleroma, the realm of pure light. In the three steles of Seth, an ancient Gnostic hymn preserved from the 2nd century, Seth is portrayed as a luminous being standing before the invisible God, offering praises of recognition. He says, "I know you. I know your names. I know the eons that came forth from you." These were not words of worship, but of remembrance. To know the divine meant to awaken the spark within, to remember the origin of one's true being. According to these texts, the Demiurge and his archons controlled humanity through ignorance and forgetfulness. They crafted religions and systems to keep the soul focused outward, on rituals, laws, and fear, instead of inward, where the divine spark resides. Seth, however, rediscovered the forgotten key, that salvation is not found in worshiping the creator of matter, but in transcending his illusion through awareness. The Sethian tradition described 3 stages of awakening. The first is recognition, realizing that the world's God is not the ultimate source of light, but a counterfeit. The second is remembrance, the awakening of the divine spark within through inner vision, silence, and knowledge. The third is ascent, the soul's liberation from the cosmic prison after death, passing through the gates of the archons by knowing their names and refusing their deception. It is said that Seth passed this sacred knowledge to a chosen lineage, not through blood, but through spirit. In these texts, the seed of Seth refers to those who possess within themselves a memory of the higher realms, even if buried beneath layers of pain and confusion. These souls, scattered throughout history, feel a deep inner call, a sense that this world is not their true home. Perhaps you, listening to this, have felt it too, the quiet intuition that something here is profoundly wrong, that life itself is a test designed to make you forget what you really are. Seth taught that this test is not punishment, but opportunity. The soul must descend into darkness to remember its own light. To awaken is to transform suffering into remembrance. In one passage, the Gnostics wrote, "The world hates the children of Seth, for they remind it of what it has lost." This is a powerful statement. It means that anyone who begins to see beyond the illusions of material life becomes a threat to the very system that depends on human ignorance to survive. Think about that. How many times in your life have you felt that when you started questioning, the world pushed back? People called you strange, dangerous, or lost. That resistance is the same force the Gnostics described. The Demiurge's power is not brute force. It is the comfort of conformity, the seduction of false light. Seth's awakening was a map for every soul who would follow. His code of liberation was hidden in symbols, not to exclude people, but to protect the knowledge from those who would twist it for power. The serpent, the tree of knowledge, the flood, these were all messages encrypted for those with eyes to see. The outer story concealed the inner truth, that divine light hides within you, waiting for the moment you recognize yourself as more than flesh and memory. When the church later encountered these teachings, they declared them heresy. They could not allow the idea that God, the supposed creator of heaven and earth, might be a deceiver, or that salvation might come without their authority. The Gnostics didn't seek to destroy faith, they sought to awaken it. But awakening is dangerous to systems built on control. And so, the figure of Seth was buried again. His texts burned, his name forgotten, his followers scattered. Yet the Gnostics believed his spirit would return in every age, not as a person, but as a force, a remembrance within certain souls who feel that call of light in a dark world. Could it be that this same force is awakening again today? That the story of Seth is not just ancient myth, but the mirror of our own spiritual battle, between illusion and truth, between comfort and awakening? In the next part, we'll uncover how this battle unfolded, how Seth's knowledge survived the flood and became the foundation for the first secret brotherhoods of light that kept the flame of Gnosis alive. After Seth's awakening, the world entered a new age, an age of confusion, where the line between light and shadow blurred. The Gnostic texts describe that the archons, furious that a human had seen through their deception, conspired to erase Seth's lineage from the earth. They infected the hearts of men with ignorance, turning their minds toward violence, lust, and greed. The Apocryphon of John tells that the archons said among themselves, "Let us bring upon them delusion, so that they may forget their source." It was then that the great flood was conceived, not simply as punishment for sin, but as an attempt by the Demiurge to drown the spiritual seed of Seth. But the true Father, the hidden God beyond the cosmos, would not allow the divine spark to vanish. According to the Gospel of the Egyptians, Seth was warned by luminous beings, messengers from the higher eons, to preserve the sacred Gnosis before the waters came. He inscribed the teachings on tablets of light and hid them within the mountains, protected by those who understood their power. These teachings, the texts say, were to be rediscovered by souls of the same divine race in future ages, souls who would once, again, remember their origin and resume the path of liberation. This story, of course, echoes the more familiar tale of Noah's Ark, but from a completely different perspective. In the Gnostic vision, the Ark was not just a physical vessel. It was symbolic of inner preservation. The true Ark was the consciousness of those who carried the spark, the few who remembered while the rest of humanity was swept away in the tide of forgetfulness. When the flood subsided, the material world rose again, cleansed but not transformed. The Demiurge still ruled through the illusion of order, creating civilizations that worshipped him under different names: El, Yahweh, Zeus, Saturn. The ancient brotherhoods of light, descendants of Seth's teaching, moved in secret. They were the hidden priesthoods of Egypt, the keepers of the mysteries of Hermes and Thoth, and later, the guardians of the sacred flame that would resurface in the Essenes and early Christian mystics. One passage from the Trimorphic Protenoia says, "I entered into the midst of darkness, into the prison of the body, and I said, let there be light within those who hear." This voice, the same spirit that spoke through Seth, appeared in every era, through different teachers, always reminding humanity that the world's creator was not the ultimate source of being. And yet, for every appearance of light, the archons adapted. They built new religions, new systems, new distractions to keep humanity asleep. Each time truth began to awaken, illusion disguised itself as faith. The Gnostics saw this as the endless cycle of the world, the Demiurge pretending to offer salvation, while keeping the soul chained to the wheel of rebirth and suffering. But the Sethian lineage, though nearly forgotten, persisted. Its members were never defined by race or creed, but by awareness, by the inner recognition that something in them did not belong to this world. They were wanderers, philosophers, prophets, poets, and mystics. They were those who could walk through the illusion and not be blinded by it. It is said that before leaving the world, Seth prophesied the coming of another who would awaken humanity again, one who would embody the same divine spark and challenge the powers of the Demiurge. Some Gnostics later believed this prophecy pointed to Christ, not as the son of the God of Israel, but as the emissary of the true light, the same force that once awakened Seth. In that vision, Seth was not replaced by Christ. Christ continued his work. The Gnostics called him the son of the incorruptible man. So perhaps the flood was not the end, but the beginning, the moment when the seed of awakening was buried deep within humanity's memory, waiting for the right moment to bloom again. And this leads to the most haunting question. What if that seed is still within you? What if, across lifetimes, the divine spark preserved by Seth continues to seek recognition through your own consciousness, waiting for you to remember what he remembered? In the next block, we'll reveal how this idea that Christ was the continuation of Seth's rebellion against the Demiurge completely reshaped the hidden teachings of early Christianity, and why the Church had to bury it forever. For centuries, the world forgot the laughter of Seth, that fearless act of awakening that mocked the illusions of the false creator. Humanity, once luminous, had fallen again into the arms of the Demiurge, now disguised behind temples, altars, and scriptures. But according to the Sethian Gnostics, the divine plan did not end with the flood, nor with the loss of the ancient brotherhoods. The spark had been scattered, and when the world once again became dark enough, a new emissary would appear. He would come not to found a new religion, but to reignite the ancient fire of Gnosis. That emissary, they said, was the Christ of the Gnostics, not the same figure described by the Church, but a cosmic intelligence from the Pleroma, continuing the mission that began with Seth. To understand this mystery, we must first grasp what the Gnostics meant by Christ. To them, Christ was not simply Jesus of Nazareth, but the descent of the divine Logos, the Word, the voice of pure truth that awakens souls lost in matter. In their eyes, Seth was the first vessel of that Word, the first human to remember the divine origin. When the time came, that same force manifested again through Jesus, who became the living expression of Gnosis, teaching that the kingdom of heaven is not outside, but within. This teaching directly challenged the authority of the Demiurge and his earthly institutions. The Gnostics believed that when Jesus spoke of the Father who is not of this world, he was revealing the same secret that Seth had known, that the God who rules this realm is not the ultimate source, but a veil over it. This was a dangerous idea, one that could overturn every structure of power built on fear, obedience, and control. The Gospel of Judas, a text found among the same Egyptian sands that preserved the Sethian scriptures, goes even further. In it, Jesus laughs, just as Seth once did, at the disciples who worshiped the false god. He says, "You worship the god of this world, but I know the one who is above him." This laughter, echoing Seth's, represents liberation through knowledge. It is the laughter of the awakened, those who no longer take the illusions of the archons as reality. According to the second treatise of the great Seth, Jesus spoke directly through the spirit of Seth, declaring, "I am Seth. I was in those who are from the beginning, and I am now in the children of the incorruptible light." The meaning is profound. The same consciousness, the same spark that once defied the Demiurge in ancient times, continued its work through new vessels, generation after generation, guiding humanity toward awakening. But this truth was too radical for the emerging religious powers of the world. The Church, still forming its structure under the influence of the Roman Empire, needed order, not awakening. It needed followers, not rebels. And so, the message of Gnosis was labeled heresy, the texts destroyed, and the name of Seth, once sacred, became an echo of blasphemy. Those who sought inner revelation were told to obey authority instead. The Gnostics believed that this was the moment when the world's spiritual axis tilted once more toward darkness. Salvation was externalized. God was moved from within the human heart to a throne above the clouds. The inner journey became sin. The search for self-knowledge became pride. And yet, the divine spark could not be extinguished. The Sethian current survived, quietly passing through mystical circles, hermetic schools, and hidden orders, resurfacing in whispers, from Alexandria to Cathar fortresses in medieval France, from Sufi poets to alchemists in the Renaissance. What connects them all is the same intuition, that the creator of this world may not be the ultimate God. And that truth is something one must remember, not be taught. Each time someone breaks free from fear and begins to question reality, that ancient lineage awakens again. It is not about rejecting the world, but seeing it clearly, recognizing the illusion, yet walking through it with the light of awareness. You can almost feel the weight of this knowledge. If Christ and Seth were expressions of the same divine voice, then perhaps awakening is not a miracle reserved for a chosen few. It is the natural right of every soul. The Demiurge's greatest trick was to convince humanity that it must ask permission to be free. But as Seth and the Gnostic Christ both revealed, freedom begins the moment you stop mistaking the prison for paradise. Now consider this. If these truths were buried, if these writings were silenced, what else might have been hidden from you? How many sacred words were rewritten so that humanity would forget its divine origin? In the next block, we will explore the forbidden symbols, the serpent, the tree, the cross, and how, according to Sethian Gnosis, they do not represent sin or suffering, but the path to liberation from the Demiurge's world. If you could look beyond the veil of religion, beyond the symbols you've been told to fear, what would you see? What if the very images long used to keep you obedient were, in their oldest meaning, keys to awakening, remnants of Seth's secret Gnosis? The Gnostics believed this. They taught that the serpent, the tree, and even the cross were not marks of sin or submission, but symbols of liberation, maps drawn for the soul to escape the illusion of the Demiurge's world. Let's begin with the serpent. In almost every Orthodox tradition, the serpent in Eden is the villain, the deceiver who led humanity into sin. But in Gnostic texts such as the hypostasis of the archons, the serpent is something entirely different. It is the emissary of Sophia, the divine feminine wisdom who pitied humanity's ignorance under the Demiurge's rule. When she saw Adam and Eve trapped in blindness, she sent a messenger, the serpent, to remind them of their true origin. The serpent did not tempt humanity to fall. It invited humanity to wake up. In this telling, the fruit of the tree was not a curse, but a revelation. Eating it was not rebellion against God, it was rebellion against the false God. The serpent's whisper, "You shall not surely die, but your eyes shall be opened," was the first echo of Gnosis. Adam and Eve's so-called fall was actually the moment they gained the first spark of awareness. The Demiurge's anger afterward was not divine justice, but fear that humanity would no longer remain his obedient creation. This reinterpretation shocked early theologians who saw it as blasphemy, but to the Gnostics, it was a mirror held up to reality. The true God, they said, would never punish the search for knowledge. Only a false creator, insecure in his authority, would demand ignorance as proof of faith. Now, consider the tree of knowledge itself. The Gnostics viewed it as a living symbol of the divine structure, its roots hidden in the pleroma, its branches stretching into matter. When the serpent guided humanity to the fruit, it was guiding them to reconnect heaven and earth within their own consciousness. The original sin, then, was not disobedience. It was forgetfulness, the soul's amnesia of its own divinity. Seth's lineage, they said, carried the memory of that first awakening. His race of light was born from those who had not forgotten the serpent's secret, that within every human lies a spark that can see beyond the illusions of the rulers. The archons, terrified of this, inverted the symbol. They turned the serpent, the bearer of wisdom, into the emblem of evil. They transformed knowledge into sin and obedience into virtue. In this way, they ensured humanity would remain asleep, fearing the very path that could set them free. And then came the cross, another misunderstood symbol. Long before it became a Roman instrument of torture, the cross was sacred geometry. To the Gnostics, it represented the intersection between spirit and matter, heaven and earth, the vertical and the horizontal. It was not a sign of death, but of transformation, the point where the divine light pierces the material world and redeems it from within. In the second treatise of the great Seth, the voice of the Gnostic Christ speaks again. It was another, their own man, who drank the gall and the vinegar. Not the first. They thought they killed me, but I was laughing at their ignorance. This laughter echoes Seth's. It reveals that the crucifixion, in the Gnostic understanding, was never the triumph of death over life, but the opposite. The body may suffer, the illusion may seem victorious, but the awakened spirit is untouched. The cross of light, the true cross, is an inner experience. It is the moment when the divine spark within you recognizes its prison and rises through it. It is where the illusion of suffering transforms into awareness, where pain becomes the path of liberation. That is why, to the Gnostics, both Seth and Christ carried the same symbol, not as victims, but as victors who saw through the veil. The deeper we look, the clearer it becomes that history did not erase the truth. It inverted it. The serpent, the tree, the cross, each was turned upside down to hide what they truly meant. The Church of the Demiurge needed humanity to fear its own awakening. And what better way than to transform the symbols of freedom into warnings of eternal damnation? But despite every attempt to bury them, these symbols survived in alchemical emblems and mystical diagrams, in the quiet intuition that the things we've been told to fear might actually lead us home. And perhaps this is why so many seekers today are drawn once again to these forgotten signs. Something in them resonates, as if calling from a memory older than this world. The question, then, is not whether the serpent deceived us, but whether we have deceived ourselves by accepting the story told by those who feared its message. What if the true fall of humanity was not into sin, but into blindness, and the only redemption is to see again? In the next block, we will unveil the hidden nature of the Demiurge itself, how this false creator continues to operate through systems of control, belief, and emotion in the modern world, and how recognizing its patterns is the first step toward liberation. The Gnostics believed the Demiurge was not merely an ancient myth, but a living force, a consciousness that operates through illusion, deception, and order without wisdom. They said it hides behind the face of every system that feeds on ignorance, fear, and separation. The ancient texts spoke of it as a cosmic ruler, but its truest power is psychological and spiritual. It does not need to appear in the sky or thunder its name. It speaks in the voice that tells you to conform, to obey, to forget who you are. In the modern world, the Demiurge no longer wears the crown of a god or the robes of a priest. It wears the face of society itself, the machinery of culture, media, and distraction that keeps human beings bound to the external. Think of how the Gnostics described its strategy. The rulers create false realities to keep the soul asleep. Isn't that what we live in today? A world overflowing with noise, with endless images, where people are too busy chasing validation to ask what is real. The Demiurge has adapted perfectly to this age. It no longer needs temples. It has built its altars into screens and markets, into ideologies and fear of difference. The archons, the lower powers serving the Demiurge, were described as parasites of the mind, feeding on human emotion. They sustain themselves through cycles of suffering and distraction. The Gnostic texts say that when a soul forgets its true nature, it becomes food for the rulers. Look around. The anger, division, and constant anxiety of the modern world are not accidental. They are symptoms of a deeper spiritual manipulation, a design that feeds on disconnection. When Seth laughed at the rulers, he broke that spell. He refused to give his energy to the illusion. That is the real rebellion the Gnostics spoke of, not the kind of rebellion that destroys, but the one that remembers. To awaken is to withdraw your consent from the false order of the world. It is to see how systems of control, religious, political, economic, even technological, mirror the same architecture the Gnostics described 2,000 years ago. The matrix they spoke of was not made of circuits, but of beliefs. The Demiurge operates through imitation. It cannot create life, only copy it. It produces copies of truth, copies of love, copies of light. That is why so many people feel an emptiness beneath their success, a dull ache even after achieving everything the world promises. They are surrounded by imitations that never satisfy because they are made of shadow, not substance. To the Gnostics, this was the greatest trap, to believe that fulfillment could come from what the false creator offers. But this is also where the path of awakening begins. Once you see the mechanism, you can no longer be controlled by it. The Gnostics taught that the soul must know the names of the archons. In other words, recognize the patterns of deception. The name is the nature. When you see how fear, guilt, and vanity bind you, their power dissolves. Ask yourself, how many choices in your life have been guided by fear of being different, of being judged, of losing comfort? Each of those fears is a thread in the web of the Demiurge. Breaking one thread is enough to begin remembering who you are. And that memory is the one thing the false creator cannot replicate. That is why the world resists awakening. When a person begins to wake up, the system often reacts. People turn against them. Confusion arises, and everything seems to fall apart. The Gnostics saw this as the Demiurge's final test. When you begin to see clearly, a false light will try to blind you one last time. But if your heart remains pure, if you hold to inner truth, the illusion collapses. That is the moment of Gnosis, the recognition that the prison was never locked, that the chains were made of belief. Perhaps this is what Seth's laughter meant. He saw that the ruler's power existed only because humanity gave it to them. Once you withdraw your energy, they fade like shadows at dawn. The true God, the source beyond all form, needs no worship, no temple, no fear. It exists in stillness, in silence, in the breath between thoughts. The Demiurge shouts. The divine whispers. Today, as humanity once again stands between confusion and awakening, the ancient story of Seth returns as a mirror. It asks, will you remember what he remembered? Will you see through the grand deception, or will you keep serving it in comfort? The test is the same, though the world has changed its mask. In the next and final block, we will bring all of this together, the mission of Seth, the awakening of Christ, the deception of the Demiurge, to reveal how you can embody this knowledge in your own life, because the path of Gnosis is not history. It is happening within you right now. In the end, the story of Seth is not only an ancient myth, it is a mirror. The moment you understand that, the myth begins to breathe again through you. The Gnostics said that every age would witness the return of those who carry the spark of Seth, those who feel an unexplainable calling, a yearning to see beyond appearances, to question, to remember. They are not bound by race, religion, or nation. They appear wherever illusion grows too strong, drawn together not by dogma, but by recognition. When one remembers, another awakens, and thus the hidden lineage continues. Seth's defiance of the Demiurge was not rebellion for rebellion's sake. It was a cosmic act of compassion, the refusal to worship ignorance. He saw that the true God does not demand submission, but remembrance, that the divine light within each soul is not a gift given by the rulers, but the essence of what we already are. When the world tells you to kneel before fear, before authority, before the false idea that you are small, Seth's laughter echoes through eternity as a reminder. The rulers are blind, and you were never their creation. This same voice spoke through Christ in the Gnostic Gospels, the voice that said, "The kingdom of God is within you." To the awakened, this is not a metaphor. It is a revelation. It means that the path to liberation does not lie in escaping the world, but in transforming the way you see it. When you awaken, the illusion loses its grip, and even the Demiurge's prison becomes a field of light. The Gnostics compared this moment to the breaking of a mirror, when all reflections of false identity shatter and only truth remains. You begin to see that everything the world taught you to fear, the serpent, the silence, the unknown, were never your enemies. They were the guardians of knowledge, waiting for you to stop worshiping the false sun and turn inward toward the eternal flame. So, how do you live this awakening today? You begin where Seth began, with awareness. Observe the world without letting it dictate who you are. Recognize the illusions, the voices that say you are incomplete, the systems that thrive under distraction. Each time you choose presence over fear, silence over noise, truth over comfort, you weaken the Demiurge's hold. Each act of awareness is an act of rebellion. The ancient texts warned that the final battle is not fought in heaven or on earth, but in the human heart. The Demiurge does not need armies, only your consent. And Seth's victory, echoed by the Gnostic Christ, shows that true freedom requires no weapons, no violence, no domination. It is achieved through inner vision, through the courage to remember yourself when the world tries to make you forget. That is why the Gnostics said that those who awaken become invisible to the rulers, not because they vanish, but because the ruler's illusions can no longer reach them. When you awaken, you step out of the game entirely. You begin to live from the light, not from the shadow. And perhaps this is the final test the Demiurge imposes, to see who can walk through illusion without being seduced by it. If you've listened this far, maybe something within you has stirred, a memory, a spark, a question. That is how it begins. The same voice that once whispered to Seth, that spoke through Christ, is now whispering to you. Remember, if this message has awakened something in you, let it be the beginning of your own search for Gnosis. Leave a comment below sharing what resonated most deeply, because every word you write here becomes part of a living community of seekers, those who refuse to sleep under the spell of the false light. Your comment, your presence, keeps this forgotten knowledge alive in the world. And if you want to continue this path with us, exploring what was hidden, what was forbidden, what was erased, subscribe to this channel and join a gathering of souls rediscovering the light of the true source. Together, we rebuild the memory of what humanity was always meant to be. Now ask yourself, could it be that you, too, carry the spark of Seth, and that your awakening is the very reason you are here, in this lifetime, at this precise moment? The question remains, and perhaps it will echo in your mind long after this video ends. When the false light fades, will you remember who you truly are?